welcome you to the latest episode of ShiftED. Now, ShiftED podcast grew out of the pandemic to keep in touch with teachers, to keep in touch with what's going on in the shifts that have happened during the pandemic. And we'll get into all that. But I just want to first say welcome to you guys. We have two members of Digital Moment. You can explain what you guys do in a little bit of detail, but I have Mike Deutsch here and I have Matthew Griffin with me, both from Digital Moment, which is a Quebec nonprofit for programming and education and so much more. Mike, why don't you give us a little intro? What do you do over there at Digital Moment?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having us. It's really nice to talk to you. So I'm the head of teaching and learning at Digital Moment. Folks listening may know us under the name Kids Co Jeunesse.
That's right.
So we were founded in Montreal by Kate Arthur. I want to say it was 2013.
That's correct.
I started as a volunteer for a couple of years, going into schools with the lessons that the Kids Co Jeunesse team had come up with. And that was really, really fun. And after a couple of years of doing that, I decided I actually wanted to get into the game. So I've been with Kids Co Jeunesse, now Digital Moment. We expanded and changed our name a year ago in spring of 2022. Been with the team for 5 years now. And right now, head of teaching and learning. So I work on overall frameworks and pedagogy in all the different programs that we do.
Cool. And Matt, tell us a little bit about how you got to Digital Moment.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. Yeah, I have also been at Digital Moment Kids Co Jeunesse for 5 years. I'm a former post-secondary educator and worked in education and tech, and then the startup world in education and tech when I took a break from academia. And then that led me to Digital Moment Kids Co Jeunesse when we were quite a bit smaller, and have also kind of snaked my way through the organization from the person brought in to help a very small education company grow in an operational capacity to joining the education team. Because I really, from the day I started, the goal was always, can I sneak my way into the classroom a little bit? Can I sneak my way into the classroom a little bit more? And now I'm the senior manager of educational programs. So I head the team that delivers our stuff to students and teachers across the country, specifically the stuff that we do in the school system. We do so much at Digital Moment in the formal education space, outside of the formal education space. My team specifically works in the school system. So workshops for students and professional development opportunities for teachers.
Cool.
And by the way, the answer to can Matt do more in the classroom is always yes.
Good. Well, I hope teachers listening to this know that these resources that you have are at your fingertips. You just have to reach out to these guys and they'll find a way to come in and work with your students and with you. And I've attended many of their workshops, and always a pleasure, always a learning moment. Tell me, guys, what are the overarching objectives at Digital Moment? What's the crux of it? What are you guys trying to achieve with this nonprofit?
Sure. So I would say it this way. It's not our objective to create lots and lots of little computer programmers. Our mission is very much to engage with students across the country, students in Quebec specifically, on a level that allows them to think about and use technology in a useful way, in a thoughtful way, in an intentional way, so that they can grow up and be aware of both the benefits and perhaps the shortcomings of an increasingly technological world. So yeah, we're there teaching them how to have the scratch cat chase a ball. We're there to have the microbit lights light up. But the idea is really to make responsible, thoughtful citizens.
And Mike, what's the attachment to the sustainable goals? Because I know that you guys promote that a lot within what you bring into the classrooms. What's the connection there between?
Yeah, we do. A lot of our in-class projects have something to do with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You'll find a microbit to measure temperature kind of project, right? One of the classic projects, and other things like that. But the SDGs we also address in our other programs. So teachers and librarians and families will come across us in the community, in public spaces, community centers, libraries, where we have additional programs where we have even more emphasis on the SDGs. Collecting data and understanding plastics, for example, was a challenge that we had out publicly 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Every year we have new things rolling out. One, we try to focus in our Digital 2030 Challenge. That's an open public challenge in a new SDG each year. And there's SDG number 4, which is at the backdrop of everything we do, which is quality education. And I forget which number is equality. But those are always in the background. So it's nice to have something backstopping everything we do that we always can orient towards.
Absolutely. Super interesting. I think, too, it makes it more relevant for the students as well, right? When you're attaching to something that they can see, they understand, they feel it. It's a part of, their communities, their cultures. They're fascinating.
It's nice to see that teachers are more aware of it too. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think the more conversations that include those, I think it will benefit the students in the long run. I'm sure you guys have always heard this saying of, we're trying to educate students for the future that we don't even understand, or we don't know what that future holds. Yet we're educating our youth for it. When you guys were growing up and in school, did you have that sense of that the education you were getting was going to help you down the road? Either one.
I don't know. I don't know. It's looking back on specifically the education about digital skills that I grew up with is only now coming into focus as extraordinarily lucky, extraordinarily rare. I grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I was in high school as BlackBerry was becoming BlackBerry. So I had tons of computer science classes as a high school student, and now I'm seeing, there are lots of places that now, many years later, that don't have these classes at the high school level. So it was such an outlier region that it was almost like it was understood that this was necessary. It wasn't the future. It was, you just have to take a lot of computer science courses at that level. So that doesn't answer your question at all. I had a very skewed and also very privileged high school experience when it came to digital skills. But the conversation around future forward, about sustainability, about intentionality, those were not words that were used at that time.
Right. Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, my story is a little similar. So I got really into technology as a kid. I was in the early 80s. I was about 10 years old. The first time I laid hands on a computer and learned some programming. So, that's a long time ago, right? The technology's changed a lot. This was an Apple II and, on a black and green monochrome monitor, that kind of thing. And I was programming in BASIC. I think I got into it just because it was so cool and so much fun. And that'll take you a long way when you're a kid, right? For me, it wasn't playing guitar or piano or anything like that. It was programming. Before we even called it coding, it was programming. And I actually, in preparation for talking with you, Chris, I went back to my dad and I asked him, how did we come to have a computer in the house? It was unusual at the time. And like Matt says, it's sort of a privileged situation to have. My dad, so I grew up in the States. I grew up in New Jersey. I've been in Montreal for about 20 years now, but I grew up down there. And what he told me is he was working in a bank in New York City at the time, and he was seeing computers come into the workplace in the professional world. And he saw, oh, this is going to be everywhere. So for us at home, a lot of it was just fun playing games and stuff like that. I got into it for programming, and it stuck for the long term. It wasn't a common thing. It doesn't stick with everyone, right? Lots of us just stay consumers, and we're very, very happy with that. I wanted to get behind the scenes first because it was cool. And then I think I saw how much the skills involved in programming could just be the lens that I approached the world with. I see now because of the training, because I've seen behind the scenes, I debug life in a way that a lot of people don't, because I was taught how to be systematic about that. And
you got to give us an example here, Mike. You got to give us an example of this. How would this be seen in your life, in your home, your routines?
I debug life. I like that. That just that just came to me. Cool. I think I'm going to use that again.
Yeah, very cool.
So, well, here's an example that's happening in my house right now. We've had plumbing problems in my house in Montreal, and I watch other adults who I'm related to, immediate and extended family, ask me questions about the plumbing, and the questions they ask are very, very high level. I know how to scratch the surface and test something and see whether it interacts with another thing. And well, based on the results of that, maybe what's the next thing I could try to see if I understand how this thing works. That's it's thinking like an engineer. It's thinking like a coder, that sort of thing. And I've spent a lot of years thinking that way. It's fun.
It's interesting. That's interesting. I love that new term too. I want to keep that term as well. Very cool. So as you guys are going up through school and kind of touching on aspects, because I do think I agree with you, Matt, that I think we are more explicitly taught tech and programming and all of that stuff more when we were growing up, as opposed to now, where I mean, it's almost assumed that the kids will just know it all. And I mean, I'm always surprised that, this idea of, they're digital natives. I would push on that a bit, because I think that it's very limited in what they can do, because they only have a certain lens, as you said, Mike, that they look through. Why do you think that there is less ed tech training in schools nowadays than there were back in our day when we were going to high school?
First of all, I have to go back and see, is that true? Are there, what's happening in Waterloo now?
Right. Well, for example, here in Quebec, there are no coding courses, right? There might be an after-school program, there might be a lunch hour program. You got your Lego competitions, but I mean, it's not a class saying,
right,
this is important for our students to learn.
Right.
Why is that void?
I mean, that's a really good question. The optimist in me would think that there's a whole galaxy of skills that one would need to be a responsible digital citizen, right? So, in fact, the syntax that you'd get in that course is actually doesn't have the same value that it maybe did in the past. Even if we think of the languages that exist now that didn't, the syntax of something like Python is so different, and the difficulty and sophistication of the syntax actually makes it a lot easier to engage with what used to be a whole high school level course.
Right.
The pessimist in me thinks maybe it was just forgotten along the way in the education system when you have to do so many different things. Maybe there weren't people to teach it. And if there's no if there isn't the expertise to teach it, then we'll know it gets written out of a curriculum. There's certainly parts of the country where it is optional and not taken advantage of, because some of the other options, maybe there's historical expertise in the school. So all of that to say is, I imagine it's a fairly complex answer, and I imagine there are just as many reasons why it's not in a specific school or school board as there are school boards. You know what I mean? Like, there's some context that has led to this, that, and the next thing, meaning that course isn't offered.
Yeah, I agree with you too. And I do see it as, I always hear this saying that it's everybody's job, but nobody's job, right? And I think things like skill building, ed tech, I mean, these are all things that all teachers should be dabbling in, yet sometimes the capacity kind of holds those teachers back. Or it's
Chris, I know you do work with university programs, right? Training young teachers, BEd programs, and we've done some too. And I wonder what your perspective is there, because that's a different level, right? Those are people who are not yet teaching, not yet in their career. And we've seen firsthand that they get some ed tech, they get classroom technology, they get software to be used in the classroom, or apps. But they don't get a lot of coding and tinkering and bricolage, you might call. What have you seen? We'll turn the table to you.
Well, I mean, I've seen some great pockets of success, I think, where the focus is on students and what they are going to need for the future, so that when they're confronted with a problem, or that they have that imagination and those problem solving skills that they can employ. I often don't see the connection to a lot of the content that we are mandated to cover in high school. And it seems like that oftentimes the content we're pushed to, evaluate doesn't reflect where we're going. It's more of a reflection of 100 years ago and the system that was there, where we were just a part of the system. I've seen education and the world shift, particularly after this pandemic. Well, I mean, we're still in this pandemic. I keep saying, it's over, but no. I've noticed that it shifted a lot even over these last few years, where from the research and what I've been looking at, they're saying that kids are going to be much more independent, have their own businesses, have a skill that they're going to use, and they'll be able to decide their schedule, where they work, how much they work. That's where the workforce is moving towards. And if that is the case, if we're all training students to be the same cog, I don't know how it's going to fit into the future of that. That being said, I do think that there are some beautiful examples and occasions where kids are getting information that they really need for such a future that we just don't understand yet. And I think too, with this introduction of AI into the educational world, it's thrown a kicker, because if the content can be had now with a few types of a thing, and I can get something out of a machine now, it scared the hooch out of education, because that's what we model our system on, right? So maybe I'm going to throw that back at you. Here's like a boomerang question. Same question, Mike. Like if we're looking at empowering our students with skills so that they are able to adapt to whatever environment they face, how do you teach that?
Oh, that's a good question. And how do you teach that is where I live, right? It's a question of pedagogy. What's your approach? And you and I have talked about that before, Chris, with your team. The answer to that for me and for our team, we talk about this a lot too, is not simply, I'm going to demonstrate, you follow me and try to replicate the steps that I'm doing. That's a pretty common approach that you see in lots of subjects, but especially in STEM and coding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the teacher or the visiting facilitator or the specialist from your school board is the one who knows enough to even lead that activity. They do their best to complete a project while everyone else white knuckles it and tries to follow. I think that's been a very common answer to your question. How do we teach? And outcomes are mixed when you teach that way.
Yeah.
We're looking for ways to do better than that. And I think maker educators and other people like that are on the right track when they think of posing good, authentic questions, leaving some space for the students to learn on their own, learn from each other, learn from other experts, and then consolidate once they get to understanding.
Yep. I hear you. Matt, I'm going to ask you a similar yet slightly different question.
Sure.
What have been your successes that you have noticed and felt where whoever you've been teaching or students that have been in front of you and you've been delivering, playing, tinkering with them, that something is stuck? When do you know learning is stuck?
That's another good question. When do you know learning has stuck? Well, to echo something Mike said, it's not when they copy the blocks correctly. I think at a really high level, and it's when I get a question back that genuinely surprises me, that I have not thought about the material in that way. It is so far removed from the material we were covering that they're obviously engaging with it on a very thoughtful, very deep level. And to me, I think that's the easiest metric to see it when you're spending a couple of hours with a student or a teacher. It doesn't really matter what the learner is. If they're throwing stuff back at you that is making you laugh or run in fear because the question is not too difficult, but just taking it in a direction, like they're thinking about the stuff. So that's probably the clearest way to get at some truth in that answer.
Yeah, I like it. It definitely, I've had those occasions too, so I relate. I'm like, yes, I felt that. they push your level, right? Like, or they
Totally.
show you something that you just hadn't anticipated or thought about because they're thinking about it, right? They're really actively processing it and connecting it to what they already know or things that they have seen. I find that fascinating.
And
really cool.
Perhaps for a moment, stop thinking about, and it's totally fine to think about this. If you're a student, think about like, how does this get me an A? Or a teacher, how does this let me achieve the thing I know I need to teach this school year? Those are great and super necessary. But to get that moment that breaks free from that, I think is always a really important moment with a learner.
Yep.
Well, you can see it in the body language too, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I touched on a little bit about the pandemic, and I know that we've all seen and lived and felt and all the other things under the sun about COVID. Where do you see it, how it changed education or not, and how it might help with the shift that education kind of is on or needs to get on? Where do you guys see the experiences that our kids have gone through? Some of them missing, 3 years of, well, not missing, but being at home for, 2 years of education. Do you guys see any changes and how that might be beneficial down the road?
Yes.
Matt, go ahead.
Yes. Short answer, yeah. Tons of things.
Can you give some
Yeah,
examples?
I'll start by saying some positive stuff, right?
Yep.
Because I think it's important to recognize that there's good stuff that came out of the challenges we faced. We faced a lot of very significant challenges together, and a few of those times when we were just duct taping a solution together, there was stuff that was really good that came out of it. For us, we're a Canadian charity that has limited resources. So we didn't have instructors available in every part of the country to go to every single classroom. What a shift to fully online sessions, virtual field trips, if you will. That shift meant now there is far more equity in availability of our services. We can go everywhere. And we developed some awesome relationships with school boards that we had no way of practically reaching before the pandemic. So that tells us something. What is going to change, and we don't want to change back that. We want our comprehensive thing to be available virtually. And that doesn't say, like, I'm not saying to teachers, okay, well, we're never doing in-person stuff again. No, it's finding that balance between what is the stuff that we can make available. And I'm talking practically here, like it needs to be available. It needs to be financially responsible. We can't just go everywhere all the time. And then what are those really high value moments where we can bring people together in a physical space and do a type of learning that is very conducive to that. So I guess being really intentional about what constitutes a virtual learning experience, what makes that powerful and valuable beyond just it's available to everyone all the time, and then what necessitates in-person collective learning. What do we need to do when we have that time together? Is it thinking deeper? Is it actually messing with physical objects? So and especially this last year, as we, again, I agree with you. We're not done. We're not emerging from a pandemic, but as we begin to do more stuff synchronously and face to face, being very thoughtful as we can be about when it's valuable to our audience to do things like that.
What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, that's some more valuable things. Our team personally, but I know a lot of other people who instruct online, teachers, nonprofits, and others, have gotten better at teaching online. We this was a moment that the industry was waiting for. K-12 has just been on the cusp of, okay, how do we teach remotely? How do we do this? And we've been trying different methods. And here we've had this 3-year opportunity to really focus and iterate and see what works. So it's been tremendous for us. I think it's pushed us to refocus how we ask questions, how we give out projects in the space of a workshop. Once you've booked it, how do you run that workshop so that you can actually see what people are getting and what they're not? Right? Good formative assessment practices. I don't think we were as well practiced at that early on, but now we are. I'll also say that every time I talk to my extended family in other parts of Canada and in the US, I'm reminded how different the experience was for people in different places and at different grade levels. I'm an EMSB parent myself, so I had multiple kids going through elementary school and high school during the pandemic. I saw firsthand what that was like, little nieces and nephews. Boy, a kindergartner in the EMSB, growing up as an Anglophone, maybe some listeners will relate, growing up as an Anglophone in a family where really English is the only spoken language, going to an immersion kindergarten where you're trying to learn French for the first time, but your teacher is wearing a mask all the time, all day. How are you supposed to acquire another language and socialize and everything else with a mask on where you can't see their articulation and all of that? Really, really difficult. But you know what? My kids didn't deal with that. My kids were a little older than that, were already in French immersion several years in. And so that particular problem they didn't have. And on, there's little pockets of people who experience things very, very differently.
Sure.
Our kids were in school face to face the whole time with safety measures in place.
Mhm.
And they benefited from that, but they also benefited in ways that kids in other jurisdictions didn't. Had to stay home for a year or more.
Yeah. It's tough. Excellent examples, guys. Like I echo both what you both mentioned. I do find that it opened the doors for online learning. Finally, I mean, it's been coming, and I mean, education is of all things never fast. It's a slow grind that gets us there, but I do think it opened up a whole bunch of opportunities that we didn't have the option of doing before then. So it definitely shifted things. And yeah, I mean, I think that we've learned how to cope with COVID. I mean, we have tools that are more up to date. We have our health, sanitation kind of skills have sharpened. And I was thinking about that. And I was also thinking of how I think that the similar kinds of things in schools have started to change as well, where we've just become more aware of them through having to go through those kinds of experiences like that, where we take less for granted, I find.
What's an example of that?
Well, I find that teachers are really excited to have you face to face, but will also be more than happy to jump online to do some prep or to kind of get an idea or to have a debriefing at the end. So we kind of have these hybrids, because normally I would do that all in one day. But now I can set them up a week ahead of time. We can decide on how we're going to connect this to what they're doing in the classroom. And then we can have follow-ups as well. You know, what are your next steps for this? You know, if we're working with microbits or some kind of STEAM project. So it's facilitated that. And I find that teachers are like that. They really, until you have no choice, you know, you're like, no, I can't. No, I don't do stuff online. When you have no choice, all those barriers fall down. And then there's, like Matt was saying, there's no going back, right? You can't go backwards from the accessibility and the equity that you had before then.
Well, and I think of the tech problems we had 3 years ago this time were unreal. It's like we should all be giving ourselves a pat on the back, like how good we've gotten at all of this stuff. It really is amazing that it's not weird to set up that video chat leading up to a professional development experience, or here is a asynchronous learning resource. Even that phrase, I feel like I can say that to almost anyone now, and they're like, "Sure, I get what you mean. I will do the asynchronous learning resource before the synchronous learning happens," and that just makes it makes certain things a lot easier. It does bring equity, but I think what's really exciting about the potential is that can bring more depth. Those first steps that used to take an hour or a day or a week, or, you know, the coding fundamentals, there's now a world of resources that people can do before joining a room together. So it, you know, again, that's the optimist. That's the utopia I dream of. It's obviously not that, but like there's a lot of potential.
Absolutely. That's cool. I love that. So as we kind of draw to a close here, guys, let's get down to some brass tacks a bit. So digital moment, like I'm a teacher. I'm wanting something new. I want to bring more tech in. I'm not completely comfortable with a lot of the technology that's out there. You know, I know my basics. I know how to do my mail, my Word, my PowerPoints, but I want my kids to have more. How can you guys support schools and teachers that, and what are some of the things that you have in your offerings?
Well, I think the easiest way is we actually have our classroom workshops set up almost as a self-serve resource on our website. We mentioned we're Digital Moment now. The Kids Code Jeunesse website, kidscodejeunesse.org or kcj.org, has a page for teachers, and you can book a classroom workshop. Now, as we were just saying, these are by and large virtual workshops. You can book a virtual session with one of our instructors as you like. These are the sessions that are a great introduction to these fundamental coding concepts. Intro to Scratch, intro to microbits, intro to artificial intelligence, intro to even some text-based coding. We do JavaScript workshops as well. And then for each of those subjects, we have 1 or 2 workshops that goes a little bit deeper. How can you connect Scratch to an AI machine learning model? How can we do the same with a microbit? How can we engage with, I guess is also machine learning and JavaScript as well. Okay. So there's a fair amount if a teacher just wants to explore and has a sense of what they want for their classroom. All the workshops have rough grade levels associated with them, so it should be fairly straightforward to connect to what's happening in your classroom. However, maybe a teacher is listening and nothing I said made any sense. That's fine too. At that point, we would love to connect because we have folks on my team who are always ready to walk you through that process. What is your classroom like? What are you interested in learning? And then they can set you on the right path. Additionally, if you are a teacher who is interested in really building a community of practice in your school, well, then our professional development is probably the best way to get started. So we can come into a school, and in that case, we arrange it to fit a couple of things: schedule of the school or the school board, and the context. So what are you looking to learn? Is this, again, coding fundamentals? Is this curricular connections you're looking for? Is this the first step or the next step? And we can arrange the best solution for your school. That may be a virtual session. It may be an in-person session. It may be a combination of the two. It may be, well, here's an asynchronous resource, and then we'll come together and build lesson plans together. Something like that. So when we're dealing with schools and school boards directly, we like to plan something together so we can ideally build something sustainable. But again, if you're a teacher who knows what you want, it's super simple to go click through, find the workshop you want, and book it online.
Cool. So you guys really do try to connect it to what's going on in that classroom or in that teacher's classroom that's reaching out to you.
Absolutely. Now, that's a fairly significant challenge because we are trying to connect it to 13 provincial and territorial curricular documents. So what you won't really find on our website is this connects to grade X in province Y. I would say we do have a fair amount of knowledge of that. So when we're, for example, doing a teacher training, it's a lot easier for us to have that conversation about, well, this does connect to subject X in where you are. Especially in a place like Quebec, a huge percentage of our team is located here. We have a lot of experience planning and delivering work in Quebec schools, and have a lot of expertise dealing with and building workshops for the Quebec curriculum. So it's something that we do, even if it's hard to see on the website when it comes to delivering and making that plan. We absolutely try to build it contextually.
Cool. And Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I'll say if folks are listening and they have another hat that they wear besides classroom teacher, if you're a librarian or a parent, you might find us under the name Kids Code Jeunesse. We do community programs in different sorts of venues around Quebec and elsewhere. You'll see us in libraries and community centers and other public places. We also have these 2 new programs that are growing. You'll find them on the Digital Moment website, digitalmoment.org. That's the Digital 2030 program. We have roundtables where we bring youth to talk about policies and new issues in AI and the Sustainable Development Goals and things like that, sort of the digital future. And we have another program that we call the Social Innovation Lab. And that's the first time that we're bringing in a cohort of youth. We're targeting teenagers in person. We're starting in Montreal, and we advertise when there's a new cohort ready to start. And what we do in the Social Innovation Lab is we teach them some digital skills, help them start to build things that are their own ideas with the help of mentors. So not just following our footsteps and building the projects that we've come up with, but thinking about social issues around them and problems they'd like to take on.
That's super cool. And that's it. That's a new initiative you guys are taking on. Have started.
Yeah, exactly. The Social Innovation Lab digital moment.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to include all the links in the description so that people can access them. But I agree with you guys too. Like, I mean, cross-curriculars are digital competency. I mean, these are things that you'll find through all of these programs, right? So if you're thinking, how am I going to connect it to what I have to do? Well, boom, use your digital competency or your cross-curriculars. They're all there, right? And what better way to get your kids ready for the future than developing their creativity, developing their problem-solving skills, developing their collaboration skills. And I could go on, but I won't. I want to thank you guys. It's been a real treat. I know we've been up in the clouds a little bit, but we brought it down to real brass tacks as well. It's always fun just kind of talking about education in the future and the past and mixing it all together into this beautiful stew of learning, hopefully.
Really
so thank you, Matthew. That was really cool. Mike, always a pleasure seeing you guys, and we'll be seeing you guys around for sure.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Right on. And